The first colonists to arrive in Australia came from England in 1788, taking 150 days to make the voyage. Altogether, they numbered just over 1,000 souls, men, women, and children, the founders of the first Australian colony of New South Wales. During the next 50 years, other immigrants from the British Isles settled at different points along the coast, and although the early development of the continent was slow, it continued steadily. In 1825, the island of Tasmania became a separate colony. Western Australia was established 4 years later, and in 1836 the colony of South Australia was formed. About this time, small parties from Tasmania crossed to the mainland, while overlanders from New South Wales pushed south across the mountains to start new settlements. In 1851, the colony of Victoria was declared, and finally, in 1859, Queensland was separated from New South Wales. The 6 colonies developed independently as pioneers pushed back the frontiers of the early settlements. Each established its own government, its own laws and trade barriers, and each maintained separate relations with the home government in England. In 1900, they agreed to federate, and the 6 colonies became the 6 states of the Commonwealth of Australia. One continent, one nation, and one united people. 10 years later, an area of 900 square miles in New South Wales was proclaimed federal territory, and plans were made for the building of the national capital, Canberra. A 100 years ago, the pioneers came this way, looking for new land. They came to find pasture for their growing flocks, land to plow and sow, land upon which to build their homes and the future of their children. And in their migration, they founded towns and villages where many of their descendants still live, raising sheep, growing crops, carrying on the tradition of the land. Those who came this way climbed the southern highlands and found a high valley in the foothills of the Alps, and they called it the Vale of Canberra. And it was in this valley nearly a century later that Canberra, the national capital, was built. In 1911, the Commonwealth invited world architects to submit designs for the new capital. The winning plans came from the office of Chicago architect Walter Burley Griffin, and in 1913, building began under his direction. Parliament House is the architectural centre of the capital and the political hub of the Commonwealth. Near it are the main administrative offices, the National Library, and other important buildings. North and south, stretching out beyond the inner ring of these principal buildings, lie the residential suburbs and social centres. Canberra is more than a group of government buildings set in a garden city. It's a community of 12,000 people whose homes are grouped around 3 main centres, Kingston and Manuka south of the river, and Civic Centre on the north. Most Canberra people know each other, at least by sight, and share a casual friendliness that is part of the Australian character. They come from every state of the Commonwealth and from every kind of environment, and with the exception of shopkeepers and local businessmen, most of them are employed in some department of federal administration. They spend more time talking politics than most people, but in general, the community is averagely Australian in its way of life. It visits the neighbours, keeps a tidy garden, is instinctively democratic, and is prepared to make sacrifices in order to give its children a good start in life. Schooling is compulsory for all children between the ages of 6 and 15 throughout the Commonwealth. Each state government provides free education up to school leaving or university age, while many other schools are conducted privately by religious organizations. The capital is well provided with both church and state schools, but the majority of Canberra's teenage children attend one of the 2 state secondary schools, where general education is supplemented by vocational training. These are the children of a democracy. Their fathers are clerks, storekeepers, departmental heads, government advisors, gardeners and farmers. Their common bond is a love of their country and an equal right to share in its future. These are the Australians of tomorrow. Their forefathers pioneered a new continent and established in it a distinctive way of life that has made Australia respected among the nations. In the years ahead, Australia's children will be called upon to share the task of pioneering a new world and an international way of life based on mutual respect and understanding. To this end, they're encouraged to become better acquainted with the peoples of the world, and particularly with their neighbors in Asia, India, and the Pacific. Many children train for the public service before leaving school and begin their working lives in Commonwealth departments, where they play a young and active part in the routine of national administration. Their work in the capital brings them into contact with men and women from all parts of Australia, from the great industrial cities of the eastern seaboard, from the cattle country and the sheeplands, from the tropical towns of the far north and the farmlands of the south. All of these people, whatever their job in the administration, are public servants, that is, servants of the nation. Through them, the decisions of the Australian people, as expressed by the National Parliament, are put into effect. A young country with faith in the future, Australia looks toward a better world, a happier world, a world of peace and plenty and social justice. Succeeding generations have striven to get these principles accepted as the right of every Australian. And today, the country's program of social legislation is one of the most progressive in the world. Australia's participation in international affairs has become increasingly important, and the work of the capital has grown accordingly. New departments have been formed and old departments enlarged to facilitate internal progress and expanding overseas relationships. The empire governments of the United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand and India are represented by high commissioners in the capital. And since the United States appointed a minister to Australia in 1941, China, the Netherlands, the Soviet Union, France and Chile have also established legations in Canberra. Most Canberra people go home to lunch. They leave standby staffs on duty, walk, bicycle, or ride in the bus to their homes and boarding houses in the suburbs. The bus routes wind through crescents, circuits, and avenues that are lined with 2.5 million trees and shrubs from every part of the world. Oaks from Canada, Europe, and North Africa, elms from China, cedars from the Himalayan mountains, poplars from England and France. Every window in every house and building in the capital looks out onto a tree. Many of the girls working in the capital live together in community hostels. Most of them are stenographers and secretaries employed in government departments. and they play a big part in administrative affairs. They're also active in the general life of the community, particularly in cultural movements and social groups. For the most part, however, Canberra is a community of families living in self-contained houses, nearly all of which are owned by the government and rented to people working in the capital. A few older and smaller cottages remain from the early construction days, but these will eventually be replaced. One thing that practically all Canberra families have in common is that at least one member of the household works in the national administration. First among these Canberra families is that of Australia's Governor-General, the Duke of Gloucester, who with his wife and children lives at Yarralumla, formerly the homestead of one of the oldest families in the district. During the lunch hour break, the Duke leaves his work to join the Duchess and the two young princes in the garden. Brother to the King and his personal representative in the Commonwealth, the Duke performs duties in the public and political life of Australia similar to those performed in England by the King, acting in constitutional matters on the advice of his ministers. The Governor-General is the symbol of Australia's equal partnership with the other self-governing members of the British Commonwealth of Nations, whose only constitutional link is the Crown, represented by the King in Great Britain and the Governors-General in Australia, Canada, South Africa, and New Zealand. During their term of office, the Duke and Duchess have demonstrated a simple dignity that accords well with the Australian way of life and enables them to meet and speak on easy terms with neighbouring stockmen and national leaders alike. This is the kind of democracy that Australia understands, the kind of democracy that is part of the national character. The King appointed his soldier brother to be Governor-General of Australia in time of war. Other old soldiers, veterans of 2 wars, form a large part of the population of the capital. Many of them congregate daily at the Soldiers and Citizens Club, where men from all departments of the public service, occupying positions from the highest to the lowest, meet together in common friendship. Australians are proud of the tradition of their fighting men, and Anzac Day, one of the great national days, commemorates the landing of Australian troops on Gallipoli in 1915. On this day, April the 25th, memorial services are held in every city, town, and village in Australia. In Canberra, the ceremony is held in the National War Memorial, where veterans of 2 world wars parade at the Pool of Remembrance, while the leaders of the nation, diplomatic representatives, and distinguished guests join with them and the people of Australia in paying tribute to the men of Anzac. This is their day. Tomorrow, they will be average Australians, living an averagely Australian way of life. Today, they stand before the people as men who have written some of the greatest pages in the nation's history. And across the valley stands Parliament House, a symbol of all that the Australian people have striven and fought for since the first colonists came to the new continent in 1788. It's the symbol of a nation united in a democratic way of life, choosing its own leaders and its own path, and speaking with its own voice among the nations. Prime Minister of Australia and leader of the government, Mr. Ben Chifley, leads a parliament of 36 senators and 75 members of the House of Representatives, elected by the vote of all adult men and women in the Commonwealth. Like the people of the capital, these men and women come from every part of Australia and from all walks of life. Among them, both representatives and senators, are clerks, shopkeepers, doctors and lawyers, writers, mechanics, accountants, and men of the land. They come from the thickly populated industrial areas of the eastern states and the vast electorates of the north and west that are bigger than many European countries. The People's Parliament is in session. In the House of Representatives, the government of the day, elected by a majority of the people, sits on the right of the chamber. On the left, facing the members of the government, are the members of the opposition parties. The Speaker sits in a chair presented by the mother of all democratic parliaments, the British House of Commons. From the table of the House, the late John Curtin, Australia's Prime Minister and Minister for Defence through 4 years of war, is speaking to the representatives of the people from whom he came, whose way of life he shared, and whom he led through the gravest dangers they have ever known as a nation. Among members of the opposition are R.G. Menzies, leader of the combined opposition, Arthur Fadden, leader of the Country Party, and William Morris Hughes, Australia's famous leader during the First World War. All of these men who sit in the Parliament of the Commonwealth, whatever their political differences, share one common belief. They believe that Australia is a good place to live in, that it can and will be a better place, and that a share in its future is the equal right of all Australians. This was the belief of the men who founded the Commonwealth, the belief of the men who fought for it in 2 world wars, the belief of men like John Curtin who gave their lives in its service. A 150 years ago, a handful of people turned their backs to the sea and set out into the unknown to build for themselves a nation. This is the heritage they hand on to their children.